Welcome everyone to our webinar this evening. My name is John Boylan. I'm the Deputy Head of Mission at the Irish Embassy in Ottawa, and I'm delighted to be able to bring this short 30-minute event to you to mark International UN Day, which was last Saturday on the 24th of October. Before we begin, I'd like to give a very quick shout out to three very special people. That's Lara, Sally and Deirdre, who this week are celebrating the first anniversary of their arrival to this great country, Canada. So congratulations to you three capitals. Now, for many reasons, the United Nations is something very close to the hearts of a lot of Irish people. Ireland is a small nation, open to the world, so it's no surprise that we are committed supporters of this most august of multilateral organizations, finally being granted membership in December 1955. Through our membership of the UN, Ireland has played a significant role in the promotion of international peace. Ireland is proud to be the only nation to have an unbroken record of service to Blue Helmet peacekeeping since 1958. And since then, Irish peacekeepers have served in more than 20 peacekeeping arenas around the world. Our influence within the UN is therefore a source of great pride, not least the work of our peacekeepers and our diplomats. It gives me great or immense pleasure to be able to welcome a guest from each of those worlds who can provide us with some fascinating insights into the work of the UN. So first up, we have Aoife Oroch, an Irish diplomat, soon to be working on the front lines of the UN Security Council. And some of you may know that a couple of months ago, there's Aoife, Ireland was elected onto the UN Security Council for a 2-year term as a non-permanent member. This is an extremely prestigious honour, and it is one that was worked extremely hard to attain. Aoife worked on the election campaign for a number of years and is now happily ensconced within the UN bubble in New York, waiting for our official term to start in January. Our second guest is Colin Sheridan from the Irish Defence Forces. Colin has over 20 years military service and a very decorated career at that. Hello, Colin. Having served overseas on peacekeeping and peace enforcement missions in Kosovo, Liberia, Afghanistan, and most recently Lebanon. So actually, despite his length of service as an officer being impressive enough as it is, the sheer variety and breadth of his overseas service is quite unique. So we're very lucky to have him here to give us an insight into Ireland's place as a contributor to UN peacekeeping. So two fantastic perspectives to be getting right on the front line of all things UN. So what I'll do is first, I'll start with Aoife to speak about Ireland's work at the diplomatic level at the UN, and then we'll move on to Colin to give us a flavour of what the impact on the ground actually looks like. So Aoife, can I begin by asking you about the Security Council? So Ireland has observer status since the beginning of this month, and will sit at the Security Council from the 1st of January. What is the significance of us being on the Security Council? Why is it important, and how did it come about?
Sure, thanks, John, and it's absolutely delightful to be here today, and belated happy UN Day to you and the team and everybody tuning in. The significance of Ireland's place on the Security Council is pretty huge. The UN is really part of Ireland's DNA and has been since the foundation of the state, or since we joined the UN. We've been on the Security Council 3 times before, first in 1962 for a 1-year term and then at 20-year intervals since then. And I think there's a number of reasons it's so significant to be on the Security Council. So it is the body with utmost responsibility for international peace and security. We were elected in June, and the election in itself was also significant in the sense that it's a massive placement of trust by the General Assembly, the 193 member states of the UN. I suppose it's important for a number of reasons. If we look at Irish foreign policy, we operate under 5 pillars. Those are our people, our values, our prosperity, our place in Europe, and our influence. And our membership of the Security Council allows us to augment our position under each of those. It's also obviously important for the subject matter that comes up at the Security Council, the fact that we have so many wonderful peacekeepers all across the world and the incredible work they do. It's really important that we have every so often this seat at the table to discuss the mandates and discuss what may happen and how it may happen. In terms of how our seat on the council came about, it's been a long road. We first declared our candidature in 2005. And so even though our campaign for a seat was officially launched in this summer of 2018, it's actually been 15 years of work by wonderful people all across the world, not just our diplomatic corps, but even Irish people just existing in their own wonderful selves. So the campaign has been a long road, and it's been a long way coming, but it's been a really important one, and the campaign in itself has allowed us to do a lot of work and undertake a lot of work as a department. Representing the best of ourselves, I think, drives us to be that best version.
Oh, that's excellent. Thanks, Aoife. I think you summed it up really well there. It's a seat at the table where a lot of these important decisions are made, but it's also a great opportunity for Ireland. And just to say, I know how much work, or at least I saw when I was back in Dublin, how much work went into the election campaign itself. And then I felt sorry for everybody, because once you got in, the real work started. So well done. Now, forgive me, I am a big believer in the UN myself, but just to play devil's advocate, one thing you hear a lot about in relation to the Security Council is the veto power of the 5 permanent members there, and that it's very hard to get anything done without appeasing all of them. So as a non-permanent member, how much influence or impact can Ireland really have?
Sure, thanks, John. You won't be surprised, this is a question we hear often enough, and it's an important question, and it's one that Ireland really had to ask itself and continues to ask itself during and before the campaign, and indeed now in our preparation for the term. So I suppose if we look at the veto, while absolutely controversial, and you can say it can be misused, if we just look a little bit at the history, so the UN came around after World War II, after the failure of the League of Nations, where we just saw big powers leave when they felt that something was going against their national interest. So the veto now is within the power of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. It shouldn't be used as often as it is, and it goes through cycles of use, but it's really only one aspect of how the Security Council operates, and in the grand scheme of things is thankfully rare. Not as rare as we would like, but rare. Ireland can have a lot of influence and a lot of impact. It's important to think about what impact looks like. So we see a period now where multilateralism has really been under threat, and progress has been under threat. And so for a time, it's been the case that just to hold progressive lines, or lines that we would consider important, for instance, on sexual health and reproductive rights, on women's rights, on humanitarian access, etc. These are things that we often take for granted as a state, but are under threat. So in some ways, influence and impact can mean holding the line. Of course, a lot depends on what happens here in the States in the next couple of weeks, and that can really have an effect on the future of these things. Ireland has, of course, writ large, had an impact at the UN, even just in the last 5 years. We co-chaired, we co-facilitated the negotiations for the Sustainable Development Goals. Our own ambassador in 2018 and 2019, who will be our ambassador on the Council, chaired the Commission on the Status of Women. And these are huge achievements, which as a small state, we still managed to do. So I think our impact can be really, really large. And one of the most special things about Irish diplomacy and Ireland and many other countries, we're not alone in this, is our ability to build bridges. So yes, it can be difficult to get all 15 members to agree to something, but when you're willing to listen and willing to try to build those bridges, it can really make the difference. And I think that's something we hope to do.
I think that's excellent, Aoife. I mean, it's certainly a very narrow view of things to focus on that veto issue, but it is something that comes up, so I'm glad that we addressed it. I think you handled it very well. Yeah, I think no better people than the Irish diplomats to work the room or hold the line, as you say. It's very important. No. So bearing in mind, of course, the world is in a constant state of flux, no more so than the current time. And things will invariably come up throughout our 2 years that we weren't expecting, or the unknown unknowns. But those aside, what would be the three priorities for Ireland and the Security Council?
Sure, thanks, John. I suppose, yes, you're absolutely right. Lots can come up very suddenly, and we've seen that even in the last few weeks. I suppose we're looking at our Security Council term through the lens of three kind of guiding priorities, and they are building peace, strengthening prevention, and ensuring accountability. So for instance, we go to building peace, and of course we have wonderful Colin on the line, and straight out that involves kind of our peacekeepers, and we get to be now at the table and talk about the mandates for peacekeeping missions. We get to think about and discuss how conflict is changing and how then mandates and missions need to change and need to be facilitated in that change. We can also support things such as the Women, Peace, Security agenda and the Youth, Peace and Security agenda. And these are all things that are important to the department, important to the UN, and I think important to the Irish people. On strengthening prevention, that's when we talk about what happens before conflict, what is happening there, and how can we stop things before they become a full-blown conflict. So, we're talking about preventative diplomacy, mediation, non-proliferation and disarmament, in which Ireland has a very strong history right back to our Frank Aiken, a good Louth man. And when it comes to ensuring accountability, we're looking at focusing on the rule of law, in particular international humanitarian and human rights law. So this can look at protection of civilians, humanitarian access, fighting against impunity. And I suppose we have quite a bit, even if only from our own history, to bring to the table through these lenses, if you will. And that's sort of our very broad approach, which will allow us the flexibility to deal with whatever comes up.
Oh, brilliant. And in terms of, again, just to ask one of these devil's advocate questions, in terms of the UN being viewed as this big talking shop, and you often see statements being released, can you just explain to us what are the significance of these statements and what effect do they have?
Sure. I suppose this is another one I've heard before, John, funny enough. The UN itself and the idea that it's a talking shop, yes, again, we hear this a little, but the UN isn't an institution on its own. It's not an edifice, although it's a very beautiful building here in New York. It's not untouchable in its real and truest form. The UN is exactly what the preamble to the Charter says. It's we the peoples. So the UN is made up of these 193 member states, and while that is something that makes speed, for instance, very difficult, because we all have to agree. We can't force anybody into, or force any state into an action they don't particularly want to take. It's also one of the most wonderful things about the UN, to my mind, and that it is us as such. So yes, the national statements are important, and I suppose if you look at High Level Week, for instance, where every country makes a national statement, this is really, when you think about the UN itself, this is really an incredible event that every country in the world comes and says what it's thinking, and it can be really indicative of a period in time or a moment in a country's history, and indeed in international relations. And I think that's important to remember. On statements, for instance, on various events that the Security Council might make, or other parties, they're also very important, but they also need to be agreed upon. So the process can be slow, and but it's still very important, and still a real insight into what's happening.
But even though you've heard those questions before, I can't think of anyone better to field them than you. So thanks very much for that, Aoife. We'll come back to you again shortly, if that's all right. But I'd like to bring in Colin here at this stage. So, Colin, welcome. I hope everyone's well there in Galway. Colin's coming to us from Galway in the west of Ireland. Raining as usual, no doubt.
It is, John. Thank you. We're all missing you here. Everyone talks about you all the time.
Very good. Well, first off, Colin, you've spent a good portion of your life at this stage serving Ireland overseas. So in broad terms, how has that experience been for you, and what does it mean to you, that service?
I think, John, and thank you again for the invitation to contribute this evening, and it's a wonderful privilege and opportunity. I think, as you say, in broad terms, how I think most soldiers and officers of the Irish Defence Forces feel when they serve overseas, I think I'd speak for them when I'd say that it's probably the most profoundly rewarding experience of our professional lives. Obviously speaking for myself, but when I first joined the military in 1997 as a cadet, I had no family involvement with the military before that or anything. So for me, the one thing that I knew about the Irish Army or the Irish Defence Forces was its contribution to overseas service with the UN. And it's a thing that probably brought me to that vocation or that profession, was knowing that I'd hopefully have the opportunity to fulfill that and serve in an overseas environment. I think a lot of that was kind of fed to me as a kid growing up in Mayo, and us being a small nation, having a very outward-looking view of the world. You get a perspective of what that contribution was, whether it was in the Middle East or historically in the Congo and Africa and other places. So certainly for me, throughout my deployments during my career, they have been the most rewarding experiences, because not only do you get to travel the world, and you get to hopefully contribute in a very positive way in places that require your help. You obviously get to see how the Irish are represented overseas and what a good and positive contribution we can have. And a lot of that I think comes down to the personality of Irish people, as well as our training and our involvement and history with the UN. But certainly, speaking for myself, and I think many people who have served and served overseas would echo the same thing, it's without doubt the most rewarding experience of your professional life in the Irish Defence Forces is the privilege of serving overseas with the United Nations and others, of course, but certainly with the UN. And yeah, for me, it's always been the thing I wanted to do the most, and it has been without doubt been the highlight of my career.
That stands to reason. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And you've been on 4 trips overseas. You've been to the Balkans. You've been to the Middle East. You've been to Africa and Liberia, and you have been to Afghanistan. Now, they're 4 very different arenas, very different cultures, peoples, 4 very different conflicts. What are or do you take a different approach to each of those? To those assignments. What has that been like?
Yeah, I think I've been very, very lucky in that regard, that I've ended up serving in very different places and dealing with very different conflicts or post-conflict scenarios. I suppose the circumstance of the situation most Irish people without any connection to the Defence Forces would be familiar with would be obviously the Lebanon and UNIFIL deployment that has been running since 1978. And I've served in Lebanon twice, once with UNIFIL and once with UNSO, which is the UN Truce Supervision Organization. That's my most recent deployment. Each one of them obviously requires a different skill set and ways, and I think that speaks volumes to our training and also our versatility as the Defence Forces. We're obviously a small Defence Forces, but within that, it allows us to be very flexible, and through our training and our education, and again, the legacy of our deployment overseas, going back to the very beginning of when we first deployed, I think Ireland as a nation has managed to, and as a people, I guess this speaks to what we're like as a people as well, that we're very adaptable to certain situations, where some nations, countries may be less flexible in their outlooks and mindset. I think we can be that way as a people, and that translates through how we operate as members of peacekeeping operations overseas. you yourself served, you went to Kosovo, and I know you were in Africa as well, and two very different situations, as you rightfully point out. I think what helps us is our own history as a country. I think the fact that, we've come a long way in 100 years of independence, and we've obviously had to deal with our own internal conflicts on this island. I think that informs a huge part of our mindset as peacekeepers overseas. I think another thing is the fact that we have served across such a breadth of overseas missions in such a dichotomy of places and situations. And I think the officers, NCOs, soldiers coming home, educating young officers, soldiers and NCOs, and that sort of conveyor belt of that legacy of families in many cases, where you have fathers, sons, brothers, sisters, daughters serving in the same missions that their fathers and mothers would have served at, is a huge part of it as well. Certainly for me, it's never been lost to me, the nuance of watching a young soldier from Northwest Donegal, for instance, and how he might diffuse a potentially contentious or tragic or fatal situation, whether it be on a checkpoint in Lebanon or in Mali or in Kosovo. And that comes down a lot to where they're from, how they were brought up in many cases, their personalities, but also the training received from the Irish Defence Forces. So there's a huge amount that goes into the reputation of an Irish soldier overseas. And I feel very lucky to have worked across the different scenarios and different locations and countries and post-conflict zones. Have happened to see that firsthand has been a huge privilege for me.
Thanks. You hit on something really important there, I think, in that the qualities that Irish people bring to these situations, and this isn't living inside a bubble or anything like that. I think you hit on our historical legacy, be that colonialism or just the fact that there was conflict on our island and being close to that. And as you said, that the young soldier from Donegal, being able to diffuse the situation. For me, seeing it on the ground, I think it came down to their ability to relate to people, to listen to them, and to treat them as equals in trying to diffuse situations. So I'd love to get your take on Ireland's perception, or the perception of Ireland as an honest broker, as a mediator, because this is something that, people will think of us in the Security Council, in that room with 15 or 14 other countries, and being that potential bridge to an agreement. Did you see much of that ability on the ground on peacekeeping missions, and would you see that as an asset at the Security Council, for example?
Hugely so. I think, again, just to kind of speak from a personal level, I've had the privilege from being the most junior leader, as a platoon commander, a young lieutenant overseas in Kosovo, working with a platoon of, young and not so young troops from all different parts of Ireland, who in some cases were far more experienced than I was on overseas missions, and to learn from them and see what they brought. There was an old kind of thing about, soldiers, Irish soldiers, always carrying a pack of cigarettes, because if ever they were to come across a potentially contentious situation, would say at a checkpoint in Lebanon or in Kosovo, the first thing they would do is offer both sides, a cigarette, and obviously that's just a metaphor for a broader, I suppose, a broader attitude of trying to always diffuse, be an honest broker, as you say. And I think that translates, that works its way up through all the different steps of being peacekeepers on the ground. And I'm sure, as Aoife could testify in New York, at the most diplomatic level. Like I said, I've been very lucky. I was, a junior leader in, platoon commander in the likes of Kosovo, and in my most recent deployment, I was working as a liaison officer with UNSO in Beirut, where you were operating at embassy level, working with defense attaches and embassy officials, and representing the UNSO mission in the capital with, Lebanese government officials, Department of Defense, etc. So I've been lucky to work at pretty much every level between that and the junior leader level. And I think, as much as sometimes, we had this perception, sometimes we can kind of clap ourselves on the back a little bit too much, as, the Irish soccer fan being the best fans in the world, etc., etc. But in real terms, honestly, at the lowest level on the ground, working for the United Nations, in villages, whether it be in South Lebanon or in Kosovo, or working in headquarters in Afghanistan, you can genuinely see that you are listened to because you're Irish. And that carries an awful lot of weight. The flag you wear on your shoulder carries an awful lot of weight based on where you're from and the legacy of people that have gone before you wearing that flag and what that has meant. And so we kind of suffer sometimes, I guess, from that sort of over-congratulation of ourselves, but also in real terms looking at the value we do bring to certain situations. And I think this will be borne out now in our membership of the Security Council. But and I might say that meant a lot, serving overseas, and for that to happen while I was in an overseas environment and see the reaction to that from other countries that you're serving with and what that meant. That was a very proud moment, as again somebody who was serving overseas while that happened. But yes, our reputation as an honest broker is a very real thing, and to witness it on the ground in these different scenarios, these different conflict zones, and to see, although we are small, but how much value we bring to these missions is something that's really struck a chord with me and makes me very proud to have served in these places, and to pass on that to other young people who might want to do this in this line of work. Yeah, is something that's very important to me.
Thanks, Colin. I think you're right. I mean, when we look at the big picture, things like Ireland's values, and as Aoife pointed out earlier on, our priorities in the Security Council, and that's the big picture stuff, and it's very important, and a place it was somewhere in the world. But as you said, I was lucky enough myself to see on the ground the impact that Irish people have on the ground in those appointments, like the appointments you had in UNSO, like the soldier on the checkpoint. And I think that's the thing I'm always proudest of and would point to, because as you said, it flows upwards, if that's the right way to put it. Okay, to finish up, I'd like to ask you each a question specific to yourselves, if I may, and then about the future of the UN itself. So Aoife, if I could bring you back in at this stage, you're about to embark on a 2-year term of the Security Council, indisputably a high point of any diplomatic career. What does this responsibility you've been given mean to you personally?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's huge. It's really huge. And I suppose I've been working almost entirely on Security Council, the drive to get to the Security Council and other UN issues for the last 3 years. And I really truly believe when I say the vote of trust we got from the UN membership, and we don't bear that lightly. We take it very seriously. I'm so honored to be part of the department and part of the team that's here for the term. And we so much want to be effective and credible and influential. And I'm so much looking forward to getting to be part of that, and to listening, especially to listening and to learning from other member states. That's a huge and exciting part of this work for me, and has been in all the work I've done with the department so far. So it's exciting. It's terrifying in what it means and its seriousness. You hear Colin there talk so eloquently about the work in the field, and really what we do here translates so directly into that. And we couldn't be more grateful to the people really on the ground. So for me, it's an honor, and it's a privilege, and it's one I take very, very seriously.
Thanks very much, Aoife. And Colin, then on the other side of it, with your vast experience and from what you've seen on the ground yourself, obviously specific to the places that you've been, what are the main things that you've taken with you? What are those things that have maybe had a profound effect on you and you're taking with you in the rest of your life?
I think from I suppose, selfishly Irish point of view is how much you're actually listened to as an Irish person serving overseas. It wasn't a UN mission. I was serving in Afghanistan in the headquarters of Resolute Support, previously ISAF, now Resolute Support. There was 7 of us over there. It was the last time we contributed to that mission. And, obviously you're working with a huge multinational effort, predominantly led by the United States. But, to know that you were a voice in a room that was actually listened to, based on your own professionalism, obviously, but also from the fact that you came from a country that had such a legacy in peacekeeping and in overseas operations was something that really struck a chord with me. General Tim Radford, who's currently the Deputy Supreme Allied Force Commander of NATO Europe, he was the Deputy Force Commander over there at the time, and I had the privilege of briefing him once a week on different things. And the fact that he would actually listen to you and based again on the job you were doing, and also though where you were from, and that is something that's very, very important, I feel, to all operations overseas. Within the UN sphere, I think the thing that I will always take away is being on the ground and seeing the profound effect that UN peacekeeping operations can have at the lowest level to villagers. And in, whether it's Liberia, where this was something that was quite new for them post-Civil War, that was one side of it, and seeing the value that you could give, whether it was reassuring them in the operations you were doing. And there was that side of it, but even to bring it back to the Middle East example in Lebanon, which is you might forgive them for having having a little bit of fatigue, having seen the UN on the ground there for 42 years. But that's not the case. The UN are still hugely valued. The Irish in the UN are hugely valued in villages like Tibnin, Atiri, Bin Shabel, and all these places in South Lebanon. Wearing the Irish flag on your shoulder as a soldier means an awful lot to these people. And that's what I'll always take away from it. These people don't want to be patronized. They don't want to be self-pitied. Those people look to the UN for leadership, and they look to the UN for security, protection, and that's what's been implemented. And I feel, as an Irish person, soldier serving overseas, they look at that, and I can testify firsthand that's what they're getting. And that's, I suppose, the most profound takeaway that I've had from my service overseas, is knowing that it's the reason you're there is for them, and that some good is coming from that.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. I was going to ask you both about the future of the UN, but I think we have three believers in the project here, so we might be accused of speaking within a bubble. Listen, thank you so much, both of you, for that fascinating look behind the curtain at Ireland's involvement and engagement with the UN. Look, we know whatever opinion people may have of the UN, and we know that there are diverging opinions, and that's good and that's healthy. I can say with some certainty, and I'm sure that the two of you will agree, that it's essential. It may not be perfect. I mean, ultimately nothing is, but as a great man once said to me about the UN specifically, it's all we have. Like Colin, I can speak from experience and say that when you're on the ground and you can literally feel that you are the only thing standing between two sets of people who actively hate each other, you realize very quickly and very emphatically that you realize what the point of it all is. So Aoife, the fate of our engagement on the world stage lies in your capable hands. We wish you well. Colin, God knows where you'll end up next, but I look forward to reading the memoirs once they're done. Incidentally, I should mention Colin moonlights as a sports reporter for the Irish Examiner, and I couldn't recommend his refreshingly irreverent take on things more. I don't know anyone who can weave the musings of Blaise Pascal with the pained melodies of Bonnie there, and somehow use that tapestry to draw conclusions on Mayo's inability to win in All-Ireland. So check that out if you can. A sincere thank you to both of you. I won't let you come back on that, Colin. A sincere thank you to both of you. Really interesting stuff. One thing is for certain, we are extremely lucky to have people of both your caliber roaming the earth representing our country. I mean that. Thank you both, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. Hopefully, this has gone some way to explaining to you the importance of Ireland's place at the Security Council from the 1st of January next year, and the reasons behind our exceptional commitment to the UN and to multilateralism writ large. So, good evening from Ottawa, Vermagif, and Slán go fóill.